Imagine you were a cardiologist advising patients to keep their blood pressure under control, but you were on 5 medications for your own poor health. You were trained at Stanford and Johns Hopkins, so you thought you knew the keys to good health.
As a cardiologist, I used to think that I had health and longevity all figured out. Because I was a marathon runner, I felt like I could freely partake of all the free bagels, cream cheese, donuts that every hospital I've ever worked at across the US freely gives to all of their physicians.
Would you have ever thought that the key to getting off all your medications, losing 35 pounds, dropping your blood pressure from 140/90 to 115/70, your cholesterol from 211 to 118, and seeing your chronic pain vanish would be advice from some very old centenarians?
他能不能跟我们讲一下他认为他为什么长寿? We've lived with them, we've talked with them.
We interviewed Dr. John Day hoping to find out how this is even possible.
What is the longevity plan about? What's this village in China you visited?
The backstory to all of this is that I had hit my own health crisis, early 40s, like many people do, developed a number of conditions. I was overweight, had high blood pressure, eosinophilic esophagitis, and other conditions. As a native Chinese speaker, I'm frequently travel to China and speak at medical conferences there, and my colleagues had shared with me about this longevity belt of China in southwest China in the Guangxi province, where people live exceptionally long lives, free from many of the constraints, the challenges, the chronic medical conditions that we have here in the West. Looking for solutions, and the traditional way wasn't working so well for me in the States, wanted to investigate and look into this. And so this led the first of many journeys there. We had a research team, took my family many times, and over 5 years, a research assessment on this group in China that have these exceptionally long lives. It's the most centenarians in a very localized geographic area of anywhere in the world. And we wanted to study them to see what's their secret sauce.
And do you know what percent of the village were centenarians?
Yes. Now, it's a little bit skewed because this is China. And so a lot of the younger population have left the village to work at the large cities, the sweatshops, etc., throughout China. And so they've lost a lot of their younger population. So it creates a very skewed older population of these centenarians. And in fact, in the areas that we were looking at, it was often more than 1 in 100 people there were centenarians, but a lot of the younger people had left for the big cities of China.
And what kind of diseases do they have, like cardiovascular disease, diabetes? What did you see?
Early on, they had to get through a lot of the infectious diseases, and this was before China modernized and developed a very robust public health system. But once they were able to get through the childhood infectious diseases, etc., and move into adulthood, they lived exceptionally long lives. It was the norm to hit your 80s, 90s, or even into your 100s. And so as far as diseases, when we studied them, surprisingly, cardiovascular disease and cancer were largely absent from this group of people. Yes, we did see some, but the amount of cardiovascular disease, which is where my area of interest is, was remarkably low. I mean, in fact, there have been several studies published of this centenarian population, and as far as cardiovascular disease incidence, it's run about 4% in this centenarian population, with the primary one being hypertension.
How does this longevity village compare to the longevity of people in the blue zones around the world?
Very similar. Remarkably similar, actually. It's a very natural way of living where they're in harmony with their surroundings. They're physically active throughout the day. The food is natural. A lot of it was wild food, wild vegetables, wild fruit. They also grew their own. From a meat standpoint, the primary source that they did have some oily fish that lived in this river, the Panyang River, that ran through the village. Did they like meat? Of course they did. But these were very poor rural farmers in a very remote area of China, a mountainous area where it was very difficult roads had to be traveled by foot. And if you wanted your fix of sugar or tobacco, it was going to be a 7-day walk round trip. And so for most people, that was a showstopper.
Yeah, can't get my fix then.
Yes.
If you could distill their wisdom into 1 or 2 sentences, what would it be? How can we live longer?
Natural living, the way we were designed to live. In their case, they were at one with the land. They were part hunter-gatherers, if you will. They also grew their own crops. They were very poor farmers. They were physically active outside all day, every day. What they ate was natural. They had tight family relationships, tight communities. They looked out for each other, kind of an idyllic way to live.
And when's the last time you visited?
You know, sadly, I have not been back to China since COVID. Most of our trips were piggybacked onto large medical conferences where I was invited to speak, and China has changed since COVID, and they're just starting to open up again with their meetings.
I see. And what did the village look like the last time you were there? Because modernization seems to have affected all of us.
Oh, it has. And they now have a road there. Their traditional bridge, which was just a single person bridge that you could easily fall off, had collapsed on our last trip there. They have now replaced that, plans to replace that. They want to turn the old road into a 4-lane highway, as this is naturally an area of China that people are very fascinated with, and they travel from throughout China to come there to learn of their wisdom and this health and longevity miracle that has happened there with this people. A way of living that, quite frankly, has been lost from modern society.
So how do we preserve our longevity in modern society today? Because we're not going to get rid of our highways.
No. And even myself, I love my job as a cardiologist. Would I want to revert to hand farming? No, I'd rather take care of cardiac patients. That's my joy, that's my passion, that's my purpose. But we can incorporate many of the lessons. For example, on the food side of things, we can eat more naturally, these processed fast foods, sugar-laden foods.
Okay, so what about weight gain?
So weight gain, it depends. If you're on this end of the spectrum on grains, your white rice, white
My
bread,
kind of
white
breakfast,
pasta.
yes.
You know, but it even says whole grains, but that doesn't really look like a whole grain to me.
Okay.
Weight gain, and if you eat several servings a day, you're talking about a pound a year. That's 45 pounds over your adult life. If you move over to this end, where unprocessed or minimally processed, high fiber, you can count on losing about a pound a year. So it depends where you are. If you're in the middle, it depends on your body chemistry.
Chemical-laden foods, whatever you want to call them, but reverting to a more natural way of living. For those that love gardening or love to grow their own food, that would be fabulous. For me, I don't quite have that kind of bandwidth, but there are other ways you can shop more naturally if means allow for it. Eating more naturally, cooking at home, preparing things, a more vegetable-centric diet rather than a processed packaged food-centric diet. Physically, we can be more active. For example, for many of us who may have a desk job, for me, I'm typically running around the hospital, I'm in the operating room, and so I'm a little bit more physically active at my job than maybe the typical office worker. But there are things you can do to transform your office, whether it's standing desks, treadmill desks, being more active throughout the day, and then also finding times to exercise. They didn't specifically exercise. Theirs was all natural. It was part of their day-to-day hand farming. They didn't go to the gym after hand farming all day. Rather, they gathered together as their family and neighbors. We can reproduce that. So, for example, finding ways to be active with our family, walks with your family, exercising together as a family. Maybe some of your vacations are more centered around being physically active, bicycle trips, etc. Then there were other things like sleep. They were dialed in on sleep. They went to bed when it was dark at night, got up with the sun. Kind of surprising there. They weren't trying to fight their circadian rhythms. We can be more in tune with our circadian rhythms. Also, their sleep, while they didn't specifically prioritize it, they were just tired at the end of the day, so they all slept well. We can do more on that. And I think as we become more physically active, sleep will come easier for many people who struggle with insomnia or other things. Getting outside during the day, getting that natural light, recalibrating our circadian rhythms, and then at night, dialing back some of the lights before it's time for bed. Stress reduction. For them, they were so physically active. They were trying to just survive. It was a different type of environment. But what we can do is, as we are more active through the day, and then stress reduction is naturally taken care of. It's a holistic approach. And so that's why we called it the longevity plan, not the longevity diet.
You're probably one of the busiest people on the planet. I mean, when we came in, you're on a conference call. You seem like you're running a million different things. How did you transform your health while maintaining your busy career?
That's an interesting question and something we all challenge with. And finding the right balance is something we all struggle with. And it changes over time. But the core principles of trying to feed your body right, being physically active, not just for an hour at the gym each night, but throughout the day, incorporating more natural movement in your life, while also doing more vigorous activity, more activity in nature, more activity with your family, friends, neighbors, loved ones, and also taking time for the more important things in life.
And those health conditions you mentioned you have, like an autoimmune condition and 10 other things, are they all resolved now?
They are. Certainly it requires work every day. I mean, I've got to be intentional about how I live, but I've been able to get off of all of my medications. And autoimmune, one of the ones that I suffered with, is largely in remission. And so being able to just live more naturally, the body wants to heal itself. We just have to get out of the way. Stop re-injuring. Stop, whether re-injuring through what we're doing, the way we're living, what we're eating, just get out of the way and allow our bodies to heal.
Do you think the people in the longevity village understood that intuitively?
You know, that's an interesting question because these were very poor hand farmers. It was a tough way of living, but they prioritized what was important. And I think deep down they knew that certain things were better for them. So for example, a lot of the modern diets, the modern foods, processed foods, have now made their way to this village and this surrounding longevity belt. And that's really what's quite fascinating is the older generation intuitively knew that primarily a plant-based, natural, whole foods diet was much better for them and their health and their longevity than what the younger generation is currently eating. And so what we're witnessing is kind of the end of an era, if you will. The older generation is still clinging to the older ways because somehow they knew that this was the way that they should live, the way they've always lived, and it served them well. Whereas the younger generation is falling prey to the same thing that most of us in Western cultures are falling to as well. And life is also busy in China. They are an incredibly industrious people. And as a lot of the people are leaving this natural hand farming environment and moving into the sweatshops of China, their health has taken a turn for the worse. The same problems we're having in the Western countries, China is having as well. They're a little bit behind us as they were slower to modernize, and we even see this generational split. Whereas the older generation that maintained that natural way of life is maintaining their health, whereas the younger generation is losing it. And interestingly, we met a number of the younger generation that after developing hypertension, high cholesterol, obesity, diabetes, the list goes on, from their lifestyle in the big cities of China, had chosen to step away and to come back to their roots and to find employment, a lot lower pay, in the village to regain their health. And the remarkable thing is they started to regain their health as they did a major intervention by 100% changing their lifestyle, doing basically a 180. We also saw that from many of the people from throughout China that may have been suffering from all sorts of autoimmune diseases, cardiovascular disease, cancer, etc. Many of them had also moved to this longevity belt of China in the Guangxi province, and they likewise were experiencing as they accepted the lifestyle and the ways of this village, leaving the big cities of China, their health too was also transforming.
Incredible. Are you planning on writing like a version 2 of this book? Or, because it sounds like all of us really need more of the longevity plan.
Right. And that's the interesting thing here is this wisdom that we share in this book is all backed by science. And if you look at the back of the book, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scientific references to studies that also show the same thing. It really is quite interesting. It's motivational, it's aspirational, but how do we get there? That's the harder thing. For these people, I've had a lot of people, as I've given talks on this around the world, have said, oh, I wish I had the willpower that the people in this village had. But you know what? They didn't have any more willpower than what we have. The difference is they lived in an environment where they weren't tempted by the trappings of modern life. If everybody around you is eating vegetables, usually the same day you harvest them, fortunately for them, they have a year-round harvest season. They're physically active. It's going to naturally rub off on you. You don't have to make that decision. Am I going to eat the cheeseburger from McDonald's or am I going to have a salad? Am I going to work on my computer more or am I going to go with my family on a hike to bond and be physically active? They didn't have that mental calculus going on in their brain. It was the only way they knew to live.
And it seems like you've created this environment for yourself, making sure that your family's on board. I'm guessing your family's on board?
Yes, I mean, everybody has their own choices, and certainly our children have not been immune from what you serve at birthday parties, the treats that they get at school or whatever else. But it's also been balanced with them, and it's interesting, as they've gotten older, we've seen that now they're looking toward a more health conscientious diet from what they learned younger. But that is the challenge, is how do we live in this modernized Western world, but also create an environment where we are tempted as little as possible? And that's really the secret. How can we remove as many of these big temptations so that healthy choices are the path of least resistance?
So what are your future plans? Do you have more plans to hopefully visit the village in the future and keep sharing stories from it, or with your own career promoting this version of holistic lifestyle health more?
It's something that I do with my patients. I've also written books in the cardiovascular space for my patients. And those same lessons that we learned here from the village are also incorporated in the more medical, cardiovascular, healing type focused books that I've written as well. It also permeates in the way we interact at the hospital. I'm on a mission, if you will, to try to bring that to as many people as we can. My primary area of reach is for my cardiac patients and those that follow me on our newsletter or social media or through my books. A lot of healing is really up to us. We don't have to go and be hand farmers in this rural mountainous area of China, but we can live our lives here and enjoy those same health benefits that they had in a way that speaks to us.
So, can you thank him for the interview in Chinese and have him respond?
Oh my God. Your Chinese is probably way better than mine because you've just been immersed in China for so long.
I don't know about that. But,
you don't know about that. Well, okay, I have to ask you, what piqued your curiosity in becoming fluent in arguably one of the hardest languages in the world?
Initially, I was asked by my church to serve a 2-year mission that I volunteered to do with the Chinese immigrant community in New York City. A colleague that I worked with there primarily was a native Chinese speaker from Taiwan, and so we only spoke Chinese. Even though I was living in New York City serving the Chinese immigrant population, my day-to-day life was 100% immersed in Chinese. And so that was for a 2-year immersion. Later, I majored in Chinese before going off to Johns Hopkins for medical school. And it's something that I continue. I still study Chinese every day, and I've been doing that now for 40 years.
40年.
40年.
你会写中文？
以前会写，现在都还给老师了。现在是用软件输入的，就比较快一些。
他的中文比我的中文好。
哪里？
That was so authentic. That was Nali. That's a very like humble way to say no, I'm not that good. But wow, 谢谢你。
不用客气，谢谢你来拜访我。